The city was a living, breathing creature of steel and light, and from the very top of it, the view was designed to make a person feel like they were on top of the world. But for the young woman standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, all it made her feel was terribly, terribly small. Her name was Alara, and the sprawling penthouse apartment she lived in was, by every measure, a cage. A beautiful, gilded, and incredibly luxurious cage, but a cage nonetheless. Everything in Alara's life was planned, scheduled, and monitored. What she ate was chosen by a nutritionist. What she wore was selected by a stylist. Who she spent time with was approved by a team of people her father employed to manage his most precious asset, her. Her father was a man of immense power and wealth, a titan of the tech industry whose name was known in every corner of the globe. To the world, he was a genius. To Alara, he was a fortress, and she was the treasure locked inside, seen only on special occasions. Her only real moments of peace came during her car rides. The black car was a moving, quieter, smaller cage, but it was one where she could sometimes just look out the window and watch normal life happen. And in the front seat of that car was a man who was the closest thing she had to a friend. Though they hardly ever spoke, he was her driver, a man in his late 40s with a calm, steady presence. He had been driving for her family for 3 years. To her father, the driver was simply part of the machine, reliable, efficient, and practically invisible. He was the man who opened the door, who nodded politely, and who got her from point A to point B without a single delay or complaint. His name was on the employment file, but her father had never bothered to remember it. But Alara saw more. She noticed things. She noticed the careful way he held the door, not with a stiff, robotic motion, but with a quiet grace. She noticed that on cold mornings, the car was always perfectly warmed up before she stepped in. She noticed that he never played loud music or annoying talk radio. The cabin was always a sanctuary of silence unless she chose to play something herself. Most of all, she noticed the books. Alara was a reader. She always had a book with her, a paperback escape from her gilded reality. She would often leave them on the back seat, forgetting them in her rush. The next day, the book would always be waiting for her on the seat, placed neatly with the cover facing up. One day, she had been reading a thick, complex history book. As she got out of the car, the driver, for the first time, broke his usual silence. A heavy subject for a young mind, he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. Lara had been so surprised to hear him speak that she just stared for a second. "It's interesting," she managed to reply. "It's about how people rebuild after everything falls apart." He had simply nodded, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "The rebuilding is the most important part," he said softly. Then he closed the door and got back into the driver's seat. That was it. But for Alara, it was a revelation. He wasn't just a machine, he thought. He understood. He saw her not just as a passenger, but as a person. She learned little things about him over time. Not from what he said, but from what she observed. The faint, faded line on his ring finger suggested he was once married, but the ring was gone now. The way he sometimes held his left shoulder, as if it ached in the damp weather. The small, worn photograph tucked into the sun visor on his side was of a young girl, smiling brightly. He never spoke of her, and Alara never asked. It was a silent understanding between them. They were two people from completely different worlds, each carrying their own quiet sadness, sharing a small, rolling space of peace. The driver, for his part, saw a lonely young woman drowning in a sea of privilege. He had seen her type before, not in this level of extreme wealth, but in his previous life. He had been a paramedic for 15 years. He had seen people at their absolute worst, in their most vulnerable and terrifying moments. He had held the hands of the dying, delivered babies in living rooms, and fought to bring people back from the edge. He knew what real crisis looked like, and he knew the look of someone who was suffering from a slow, quiet kind of crisis, the crisis of the spirit. He had left that life after a call that ended in a way he couldn't shake. A little girl, the same age as his own daughter, didn't make it. The grief and the constant, grinding stress became too much. He needed a job with quiet, with order, where the biggest emergency was a traffic jam. Driving for the wealthy family seemed like the answer. It was peaceful, predictable. He would drive, he would be polite, and he would go home at the end of the day without carrying the weight of a life in his hands. He never talked about his past. It was easier that way. They didn't want to know about the blood and the sirens. They just wanted a reliable driver. And he was reliable. He was more than that. He was observant. He saw how Alara's shoulders would slump with relief when she got into the car after a public event. The mask of the perfect heiress finally dropping. He saw the way she devoured her books, hungry for experiences she wasn't allowed to have. He felt a quiet, protective fondness for her, the way one might feel for a wounded bird. One afternoon, her father, the great man himself, was in the car with her. He was on his phone, talking in sharp, clipped sentences about mergers and acquisitions, his voice filling the quiet space. The driver was focused on the road, a smooth, silent presence. The father finished his call and finally seemed to notice his daughter. "That dress for the gala tomorrow, Alara," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "The stylist emailed me the options. The blue one. It projects the right image." Alara, who had been looking out the window, didn't turn. "I prefer the green one," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The blue one is better." Her father repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He glanced at the driver through the mirror, as if suddenly remembering he was there. He lowered his voice slightly, but not enough. "You have to think about these things, Alara. Perception is everything. You are a Vanderbilt." The driver's eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. He didn't react, but he felt a familiar, old feeling, the desire to help, to protect. He couldn't fight this battle for her. This wasn't a wound he could bandage. This was a different kind of pain. He just drove, maintaining the silence, giving her the only gift he could, a moment where she didn't have to explain or defend herself. When they arrived at the towering skyscraper that served as their home, the father got out first, already back on his phone. Alara lingered for a moment. As she stepped out, she looked at the driver. "Thank you," she said. It was what she always said, but this time, her eyes said more. They said, "Thank you for the silence. Thank you for not looking at me with pity." He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. "The green one is a very nice color," he said, his voice so quiet only she could hear it. A tiny, genuine smile touched her lips before she turned and followed her father into the building. The driver watched her go, the large glass door swallowing her up. He let out a long, slow breath. Another day done. Another quiet journey through the city. He adjusted the worn photo of his daughter on the visor and put the car in drive, heading back to the garage, to his small, simple apartment, to a life that was a world away from the gilded cage, yet connected to it by a thread of quiet understanding and a shared, unspoken loneliness. He had no way of knowing that very soon, the peaceful world he had built for himself would shatter, and the skills he had tried so hard to leave behind would be the only thing standing between the young woman in the back seat and death. Aster Schema, Jamal, etc. The air in the car was warm and still. It had been a long, quiet drive back from a charity event on the other side of the city. The young woman in the back seat had been on the phone with a friend, her voice light and animated for once, sharing stories about the evening. It was a sound the driver rarely heard, and he was glad for it. He focused on the road, the big car gliding smoothly through the night, leaving the bright lights of downtown behind for the darker, tree-lined roads that led to the family's private estate. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still talking, a smile in her voice. And then he actually tried to show me his art collection on his phone, right in the middle of the dinner. She laughed, a genuine, happy sound. The driver allowed himself a small, private smile. It was good to hear her laugh. He turned the car onto the final stretch along, winding private road that cut through a dense patch of forest owned by her family. The world outside the windows became a tunnel of shadows and moonlight. The only sounds were the soft purr of the engine and the young woman's voice. "And I told him," her sentence stopped. It didn't trail off. It was cut short, as if someone had flipped a switch. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror again. He saw her phone slip from her hand and fall onto the plush seat. Her head lolled back against the headrest, her mouth slightly open. Her eyes were closed. Maybe she was just tired, he thought. It had been a long evening, but something felt wrong. Deeply, instinctively wrong. "Miss?" he said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you all right?" There was no answer. No movement. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. This wasn't sleep. This was something else. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the car over to the wide, grassy shoulder, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. He put the vehicle in park and turned on the hazard lights, the rhythmic clicking suddenly loud in the silence. He unbuckled his seatbelt and turned fully round in his seat. "Miss?" he said again, louder this time. She was completely still. Her chest wasn't moving. In that moment, the quiet, professional driver vanished. Another man, a man from a different life, took over. His movements became swift and sure. He opened his door, stepped out, and opened the back passenger door. The dome light illuminated her pale face. He leaned in, his fingers going to the side of her neck, searching for a pulse. He felt nothing. No steady beat under his fingertips. Just still, cool skin. He lowered his head close to her nose and mouth. He listened for breath. He felt for air. Nothing. His own heart was now hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of alarm. But his mind was suddenly crystal clear, cold, and focused. This was a code. This was a fight. He had to get her out of the car and onto a flat surface. Gently but quickly, he unbuckled her seatbelt. He slid one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees and lifted her. She was light, like a bird. He carried her the few steps to a soft, grassy spot away from the road and laid her down on her back. The peaceful forest scene was now emergency room. The moon was the only light. The chirping of crickets was the only sound besides his own ragged breathing. He tilted her head back slightly to open her airway. Then he placed the heel of one hand on the center of her chest, right between her breast. He placed his other hand on top of the first and laced his fingers together. He locked his elbows, positioning his shoulders directly over his hands, and then he began. He started pushing down on her chest, hard and fast. He remembered the rhythm from his training, a song he never wanted to hear again. Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. The beat was perfect for the speed of the COMPRESSIONS. Ha ha ha, staying alive, staying alive. He pushed down, counting in his head. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. He had to push deep, at least 2 inches. He heard a sickening crack from one of her ribs. He winced internally, but didn't stop. A broken rib was better than being dead. He had to keep the blood flowing to her brain. After 30 compressions, he paused. He pinched her nose shut, took a deep breath, and sealed his mouth over hers. He blew a steady breath, watching her chest out of the corner of his eye. It rose. Good. He gave a second rescue breath. Then he went right back to the compressions. His back and shoulders were already starting to burn. This was a young person's game, and he wasn't a young man anymore. But he pushed the pain away. He couldn't stop. Every second without a heartbeat was another second of brain damage. Come on. He grunted between compressions, his voice a low, strained whisper. Come on, sweetheart, breathe. Stay with me. Sweat was pouring down his face now, dripping onto her expensive silk dress. The perfectly pressed chauffeur's uniform was smeared with dirt and grass. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the still, silent form beneath his hands. He continued the cycle. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. He lost track of time. It could have been 1 minute. It could have been 10. The world narrowed to the small patch of grass, to the rhythm of his own movement, to the pale, unresponsive face of the young woman. He was her only chance. The ambulance was miles away. Her father, in his fortress of a home, had no idea his world was falling apart out here on the dark road. It was just the driver, his 2 hands, and a fading life. His arms felt like lead. His breath came in ragged gasps. The memory of another young girl, another desperate fight he had lost, flashed at the edge of his mind. He pushed it away, hard. Not this time, he whispered fiercely, his voice cracking with effort. Not this time. You are not leaving. Do you hear me? You fight. He gave another rescue breath, pouring all his will, all his hope, into that single puff of air. It was a prayer. It was a command. And then he placed his hands on her chest again, and he continued to push, to fight, to demand that her heart start beating, that her lungs start breathing. He was the only thing standing between her and the endless dark silence. And he was not going to move. Asterisk, the world had shrunk to a tiny, desperate circle of grass under the pale moonlight. The only sounds were the driver's own ragged breathing, the soft thump of his hands on the young woman's chest, and the frantic, steady rhythm he chanted in his head. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. His arms screamed in protest. His back was a solid sheet of fire. He was not a young man anymore, and the force required for good CPR was immense, a brutal, physical demand. Sweat dripped from his forehead and landed on her closed eyelids, tracing paths through the fine dust on her pale skin. He didn't have a free hand to wipe it away. He just kept pushing, his body a machine now, powered by a will that was stronger than the pain. The crisp, professional chauffeur's uniform was a mess soaked through with sweat, stained with dirt from the ground, smeared with grass. He looked like a man who had been in a fight, and he was. He was in the most important fight of his life, between cycles of compressions. During the 2 rescue breaths, his mind would flicker, just for a second, to the world outside this terrible bubble. He was a man who understood systems and logistics. He knew they were alone. The private road was just that private. No other cars would come. The estate was still a long way off. The main house hidden by trees and a curve in the land. No one could see them. No one was coming to help. The feeling of isolation was as heavy as the physical weight he was putting on her chest. He had to get help moving. He had to alert someone. On his next pause for breaths, his voice, hoarse and strained, broke the silence more loudly. He wasn't just talking to her anymore. He was talking to the tiny, hidden microphone in his Bluetooth earpiece, the one he used to take calls from the family's head of security. Connect to the main house. Emergency. Connect now. He barked, The words sharp and urgent. There was a crackle, and then a calm, professional voice answered. It was the night manager. This is the main house. Go ahead, driver. The driver didn't stop his work. He leaned down, gave 2 more breaths, saw her chest rise, and then went back to compressions. Speaking through gritted teeth, his voice shaking with the effort of each push. Medical emergency. Location is the private road, about 2 kilometers from the gate. The young lady is in cardiac arrest. I am performing CPR. Alert emergency medical services immediately. Give them the gate code. Tell them to come fast. The voice on the other end, usually so unflappable, faltered. What? Repeat, please. Cardiac arrest? Are you sure? I am sure. The driver snapped, his compressions never slowing. She has no pulse. She is not breathing. Now, call an ambulance. And you need to alert her father. Right now. The mention of her father seemed to freeze the air on the other end of the line. The driver could almost hear the man's fear through the earpiece. Telling the billionaire that his only child was dying on the side of the road was a task beyond any job description. I will make the call to EMS immediately, the manager stammered. Stand by. The connection didn't go dead, but the driver could hear muffled, panicked voices in the background. He ignored them. His focus was absolute. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. His muscles were turning to jelly. A memory, sharp and painful, tried to force its way into his mind. Another night, another young person on the ground. The flashing lights of his old ambulance. The feeling of failure that had followed him home that night and never really left. He squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second and pushed the memory away. This was different. This was now. The voice came back on the line, tighter now, strained with tension. EMS is on their way. They estimate 15 minutes. I have informed Mr. Vanderbilt. The driver just grunted in acknowledgement, saving his breath. 15 minutes was a lifetime in a situation like this. He had been at this for maybe 4 or 5 minutes already. He didn't know how much longer he could keep it up. The human body, even his, which was strong, had its limits. Tell him to come, the driver managed to say between compressions. He needs to come here. He knew what that meant. He knew the father might see something no parent should ever see. But he also knew from his old life that sometimes people needed to be there. For better or for worse, he fell back into his rhythm. The world was just his hands, her chest, and the count. The beautiful, silent forest around him felt like it was watching, holding its breath. The moon, which had seemed so peaceful before, now felt like a cold, distant spotlight on this private tragedy. He was starting to doubt himself. What if he was wrong? What if she had just fainted? But his training screamed at him. No. He knew what no pulse felt like. He knew the awful stillness of a body without life. This was real. His arms were shaking uncontrollably now. He felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his own chest, a warning from his overworked heart. He ignored it. He would keep going until the ambulance arrived or until his own body gave out. There was no other option. He looked down at her face. It was so peaceful, so still. It was a mask. Underneath, a war was being fought. He was her army. He was her only soldier. You're strong, he whispered to her, his voice cracking. You are so much stronger than you know. You can fight this. I know you can. Just come back to us. Come back. He wasn't sure if he was saying it for her or for himself. The words were a lifeline for his own fading strength. He thought of the father, probably racing down the long driveway in a panic. He thought of the photograph tucked in his sun visor. He thought of all the quiet car rides, the unspoken friendship. This couldn't be how it ended. It just couldn't. A new kind of energy, born of pure stubbornness and a deep, fierce protectiveness, surged through him. He adjusted his position, locked his elbows again, and pushed down with renewed force he didn't know he had left. No, he said. The word a low growl. No, you are not giving up, and I am not giving up on you. He continued. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The cycle was his entire world. He was a machine of hope and desperation, a lone man under the vast, uncaring sky, fighting with everything he had to bring a flicker of light back into the darkness that had swallowed the young woman. He would keep going until there was nothing left of him to give. Asterisk, the driver's world had become a tiny, painful circle. There was only the burning in his shoulders, the ache in his back, the feel of her fragile chest under his hands, and the count in his head. 28, 29, 30. He bent down, his own breath now coming in ragged, useless gasps, and sealed his mouth over hers, forcing air into her still lungs. He saw her chest rise. It was a small victory in an ocean of failure. He was about to start compressions again when a new sound cut through the night. It wasn't the welcome siren of an ambulance. It was the violent, roaring engine of a car being pushed to its limits. Headlights, blindingly bright, swept over the scene, freezing him for a second in their harsh glare. The car, a low-slung, powerful sports car, screeched to a halt just feet away, its tires throwing up a spray of gravel and dirt. The door flew open before the engine had even fully died. The driver knew who it was even before the man stumbled out. It was her father. The billionaire was a man who was always in control. He commanded boardrooms, he moved markets, he was a figure of immense power and composure. The man who ran towards them was a stranger. He was wearing silk pajamas and a terrified expression. His face was a ghostly white, his eyes wide with a pure animal fear. "What is happening?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "What are you doing to her?" The driver didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He placed his hands back on the young woman's chest for the next set of compressions. "It's a cardiac arrest, sir. She's not breathing. I'm helping her." The father's eyes darted from the driver's sweaty, desperate face to his daughter's lifeless body on the ground. He saw the driver's hands pounding on her chest. He saw the dirt, the grass, the utter chaos of the scene. His mind, trained to see threats and conspiracies, could not process what was actually happening. All he saw was an employee, a man he paid, violently assaulting his unconscious daughter. A red-hot rage, born of sheer, blinding terror, exploded inside him. "Get away from her," he roared. He lunged forward, his hands grabbing the driver by the shoulders of his stained uniform. "Get your filthy hands off my daughter." The driver was exhausted. His muscles were like water. The father, fueled by adrenaline and panic, was strong. He was shoved backward, landing hard on the grass, the breath knocked out of him for 1 second. 2 seconds, everything was still. The father stood over his daughter, his chest heaving, a protective, furious giant. The driver lay on the ground stunned, his body screaming in protest. The young woman lay motionless between them. And then, a sound. It was a small, choked gasp, a tiny, raspy intake of air. Then another. The father looked down. His daughter's body jerked. Her eyes, wide and unseen, fluttered open for a second before squeezing shut again. She coughed, a weak, pathetic sound. And then she took another ragged, beautiful, life-filled breath. The sound was so small, but in the sudden silence, it was louder than the roaring engine had been. The father froze. His angry posture melted away, replaced by a confusion so profound it was like a physical blow. He stared at his daughter. Her chest was moving, up and down. It was shallow, but it was moving. On its own, his head snapped towards the driver, who was slowly, painfully pushing himself up from the ground. The driver's face wasn't angry. It wasn't even relieved yet. It was watchful, focused. His eyes locked on the young woman, checking her breathing, searching for a pulse he couldn't feel from where he was. The father's mind, so quick and sharp, began to put the pieces together. The driver, shoving him away. The gasping breath, happening the very second the compression stopped. The driver's words, which he had ignored. "She's not breathing. I'm helping her." He looked at the driver again. Really looked at him. He saw the sweat pouring down his face. He saw the absolute exhaustion in every line of his body. He saw the dirt on his hands and knees from where he had been kneeling on the ground. This wasn't an attacker. This was a man who had been in a desperate, physical battle. The driver slowly got to his feet, but he didn't approach. He just stood there, his own breath heaving, watching the young woman. "She's breathing," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's shallow, but she's breathing. We have to keep her still. The ambulance is coming." The father didn't know what to do. The fury that had filled him seconds ago was gone, leaving a hollow, shaky feeling behind. He looked from his driver to his daughter, and back again. The world he understood, deals, power, control had vanished. He was standing in a dark forest, and the only person who seemed to know what was happening was the man he had just violently thrown to the ground. He took a stumbling step backward, his legs feeling weak. The importance of the man in front of him began to shift and change in his mind. This wasn't the quiet, invisible driver. This was the man who had just saved his daughter's life. And he had tried to stop him. In the distance, a new sound finally emerged. Faint, but growing louder. The beautiful, welcome wail of a siren. Help was coming. But for the father, the most important help had already been here, and he had almost thrown it away. He stood there, a broken, confused man in silk pajamas, watching his daughter breathe and looking at the hero he had mistaken for a monster. The silence between the two men was heavier than any words could ever be. The scream of the sirens grew from a faint whine to an overwhelming wall of sound, cutting through the tense silence between the two men. Red and blue lights painted the trees in frantic, swirling colors, breaking the spell of the moonlight. The father stood frozen, a statue in silk pajamas, his eyes darting from his daughter's slowly breathing form to the exhausted driver, who stood a few feet away. The driver, for his part, seemed to shake off his stupor. The professional part of his brain, the part that had been a paramedic, took over again. He took a step forward, not towards the father, but towards the road, ready to flag down the ambulance to emergency vehicles. An ambulance and a fast response car skidded to a stop. Paramedics in uniform jumped out, their movements quick and efficient. They took in the scene in a single, practiced glance: the young woman on the ground, the wealthy man in pajamas, and the disheveled man in a stained uniform who was now walking towards them. The driver didn't waste a second. Female, early 20s, he said, his voice suddenly clear and strong, all trace of exhaustion replaced by a crisp, professional tone. Witness cardiac arrest. Approximately 8 minutes of CPR before return of spontaneous respiration. Pulse is weak but present now. Breathing is shallow and agonal. GCS is about 5. The lead paramedic, a woman with a calm, focused face, nodded, already pulling out equipment. She glanced at the driver, her eyes narrowing slightly in recognition of the terminology he was using. "You a medic?" "Former," the driver said simply. He then stepped back, knowing his job was done. He had handed over the battle to the next team. The paramedics worked quickly, surrounding the young woman. They put an oxygen mask over her face, started in for line, attached sticky pads to her chest to monitor her heart, and carefully lifted her onto a gurney. The father finally broke from his frozen state and rushed to his daughter's side, his hand reaching for hers. "She's going to be okay," he asked the lead paramedic, his voice trembling. It wasn't a command from a billionaire. It was a plea from a father. "We're stabilizing her, sir. She's breathing. That's the main thing. We're taking her to University Hospital. You can follow us." As they loaded the gurney into the back of the ambulance, the father turned. He was looking for the driver. He saw him standing by the open door of the black car, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. The adrenaline was gone, and the full weight of what had happened was crashing down on him. The father took a few hesitant steps towards him. The words he wanted to say, "Thank you. I'm sorry. What can I do?" all felt too small, too meaningless. They stuck in his throat. The driver looked up. His face was etched with a deep, profound exhaustion. He wasn't looking for thanks. He was just trying to gather the strength to get back into the car. The father began, but he couldn't finish. The driver just gave a small, tired shake of his head. "Go," he said softly, his voice rough. "Go with your daughter. She needs you there when she wakes up." The sound of the ambulance doors slamming shut was like a full stop. The father gave one last, long look at the driver, a look filled with 1,000 unspoken emotions, then turned and ran to his sports car. The driver watched the ambulance and the sports car disappear down the private road, their lights and sounds fading until the forest was quiet once more. The only evidence of the chaos was the tire marks on the gravel and the trampled patch of grass. He stood there for a long time, listening to the return of the crickets. The fight was over. He had won, but he felt hollow. He got into the driver's seat, the leather creaking softly. The inside of the car felt strange and empty. He looked at the back seat where her phone still lay on the floor. He started the engine and drove slowly, carefully, back to the estate's garage. The job was done for the night. The next few days were a blur. The young woman was rushed into intensive care. The doctors found a rare, undiagnosed heart condition that had caused the arrest. They said it was a miracle she had survived. They said that the immediate, high-quality CPR was the only reason she was alive and her brain was undamaged. Every second without it would have meant a different, tragic outcome. The father barely left the hospital. He slept in a chair by her bed. When she finally woke up, confused and weak, he held her hand and cried tears of relief he didn't know he had in him. On the third day, she was stable enough to talk. Her voice was a whisper. "Dad, what happened?" "I remember the car, and then nothing." He told her the story. He told her about the driver pulling over, performing CPR for all those minutes on the side of the dark road. He told her everything, including his own terrible mistake, his own moment of blind panic, where he had attacked the very man who was saving her life. She listened, her eyes wide. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He talked to me," she whispered. I think I heard his voice. He told me to fight." That was the moment the father knew that his life, and his way of seeing the world, had to change. A week later, the young woman was moved to a regular room. The father left the hospital for the first time. He didn't go to his office. He didn't make any calls. He had his assistant find out where the driver lived. He drove himself, in a simple, quiet car, to a modest neighborhood on the other side of the city. He parked in front of a small, well-kept house with a tidy garden. He walked to the door, his heart pounding. He felt more nervous than he had ever felt in any boardroom. He knocked. The door opened. The driver stood there, dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt. He looked surprised, but not angry. He just looked quiet. The two men stood there for a moment, the billionaire on the doorstep, the hero in the doorway. "Can I come in?" the father asked. The driver nodded and stepped aside. The house was small and simple. On the mantelpiece, the father saw the photograph that had been in the car, the picture of the driver's young daughter. Smiling. The father didn't know how to start. He looked around the peaceful room, so different from his own life of marble and glass. And the words finally came. "I came to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And to apologize. What I did. I saw it all wrong. I was blind." The driver just listened. "The doctors said you saved her life. They said without you, she would be." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You gave me back my world." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, white envelope. He held it out. "This is for you. It's not a reward. It can never be a reward for what you did. But it's a chance. A chance for you to never have to work again if you don't want to. To be free." The driver looked at the envelope. He didn't reach for it. He looked the father in the eye. "I don't want your money," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I was just doing my job." "This wasn't in the job description," the father said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. "What you did, that was more than a job. That was human." The driver was silent for a long time. He looked at the photograph of his daughter. Then he looked back at the father. "Then don't pay me," he said. "See me." And in that moment, the billionaire finally understood. The envelope in his hand felt foolish and small. The real debt could not be paid with money. It could only be paid with change. He put the envelope down on a small table. "I will," he promised, his voice a whisper. "I see you now. I truly do." He turned and walked out of the small house, back to his car. He didn't feel like a powerful man anymore. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance, not just with his daughter, but with his own soul. And he knew he had a quiet, humble hero to thank for it all.